If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. There's a lot of comparisons being made that AOC and Omar and Tlaib, they represent on the left what the Tea Party represented on the right.
Oh, yeah.
They call themselves the Justice Democrats. They're, of course, just, rank and file, standard issue socialists. But you want to understand the difference between the Justice Democrats and the Tea Party? The difference between the two. AOC was on MSNBC spewing acronyms and also explaining the difference.
People say Tea Party of the left, and I find this phrase very interesting, this phrasing very interesting, because the grounding of the Tea Party was xenophobia, the underpinnings of white supremacy.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But, I understand politically when people say Tea Party of the left, because I am a progressive Democrat that won in a primary election and ousted the fourth most powerful person in the Democratic Party. I understand why people would say Tea Party of the left. The exception is that my district is overwhelmingly progressive, and our representative was not representing our actual position. So this is not a Tea Party of the left. This is a return to American representative democracy.
Oh, yeah.
She hit it on the head there.
Yeah. There's some districts that are batshit crazy, is what she's trying to say.
Really
True.
Big difference.
Here's a really
big difference. The Koch brothers funded the Tea Party, and everyday people funded my campaign.
Go, girl.
Everyday
and her brother
people.
Fighter.
I was involved and supported, worked with Tea Party groups in Illinois. Yeah. And I got to tell you, I'm pretty positive that no Koch money flowed into their coffers. Grassroots organizations that didn't have coffers. But okay, sure. Another example of Justice Democrat is one of the fungible socialists for president, Julian Castro. He is former mayor of San Antonio, HUD secretary under Obama, sort of like he is to Obama what Henry Cisneros was to Bill Clinton, and hopefully he'll be indicted soon on something as well. Julian Castro talking about how we handle the humanitarian and security crisis on the border. You know how you do it? You make illegal crossings not illegal.
I'm not buying into the BS that basically says that little children and mothers who are desperate and fleeing desperate circumstances are a national security threat to our nation. I said that we should decriminalize people who are coming here, crossing the border.
Currently under Section...
Yeah, and so there you go. Decriminalize illegal crossings. We've heard from others, and we know what Obrador wants, the Mexican president. AMLO, as he's known. He wants a Marshall Plan for southern Mexico and Central America. So he's working with socialist Democrats like Ocasio-Cortez, like Julian Castro, to get more money out of U.S. coffers, while President Trump is sending a message to those same Central American countries that he doesn't appreciate their inability to stem the tide of migrants by cutting off funding, and even talking about cutting off the border temporarily. And so the impasse that we have. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Steve Cortes, CNN political commentator and former head of Trump's Hispanic Advisory Council. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Thanks for having me.
So what about that? The way you deal with the illegals is you just make them legal.
Right. And by the way, thankfully, Julian Castro, although he's a presidential candidate, at least he doesn't have any current power, to actually inflict this ridiculous view upon America. But you know who does is Xavier Becerra, who's the current Attorney General of California, and he made the exact same statement yesterday. He said we need to decriminalize illegal immigration, which I guess, I don't know what you then even call it, because I guess you can't call it illegal anymore. But look, the Democrats are I'll at least give them kudos for this. They're finally starting to get honest about what they want, which is open borders. They've been in favor of open borders for a long time. Many of the major presidential candidates have called for eliminating ICE. They have harshly criticized ICE. We had the former CIA director compare ICE enforcement to Auschwitz in a tweet. So, this has been their position. It's an extremist and really, frankly, hysterical position that the United States should have no control over who comes into our country and that we should have a porous and open border. But it is their position. I think it's important for the American people to see that. And it's particularly pernicious given the current state of the border right now. Our border is teeming with trespassers and illegality. We have an absolute crisis at the border. Even the liberal media can now acknowledge that it's a crisis, thankfully. At least we've gotten to that point. But what is not thankful in any sense is the fact that our Border Patrol, which is the most Hispanic agency of the federal government, by the way, our Border Patrol is dealing with an untenable situation, and our national and economic security simply cannot withstand the idea of 100,000 illegal entries a month, which is what we saw in the month of March.
Well, then, what do you think? There's been a lot of vacillation going on in the Trump administration on whether or not he will permanently shut down the border. Well, not permanently, but shut down the border to send a message to the Mexican government and the president that, hey, you need to do something about your southern border because the U.S. exports more goods to Mexico than we do to China.
Right.
So what do you think?
And listen, I can tell you this, Amy, and I've had a lot of conversations, not with the president himself, but with a lot of senior people in the White House. There was really a raging debate within the White House, and there has been really since Trump took office, quite honestly, on immigration. You have a lot of folks who want to take, a softer view of a crackdown on illegal immigration. A lot of them are more in sort of the free trade camp of the Trump White House. And then you have folks more on the Stephen Miller wing who want to take a really harsh look at enforcing immigration. What I would say is this regarding shut down the border. I think it has to be a credible threat. I think that's important. Now, it's a severe penalty because it would exact real costs on both countries, on the U.S. and Mexico. You're right. We have a really robust trade relationship. I think it would be bad for our economy, certainly bad for their economy, bad for financial markets. So I hope it doesn't have to come to that. But I think, unfortunately, AMLO in Mexico has shown so little willingness to negotiate with us and act in good faith that you have to at least hold over them, sort of that most severe threat of actually sealing the border. It has been done before, not since Ronald Reagan, but Reagan did it for several days back in the 1980s. And I think it has to be a realistic threat. But my hope is that they'll respond to less punitive measures. And what we could do, for instance, are trade sanctions. We could start slapping really onerous quotas, for instance, on Mexican imports until they start to comply. But here's, I think, the bigger important reality philosophically. These countries in Latin America, both Central America and Mexico, they are very happy to turn their problems into our problems. And so not only do they allow these caravans to traverse Mexico, which is a giant country, by the way, if these people actually wanted asylum, they would be getting asylum in Mexico where it's available to them. They're economic migrants. They are not refugees fleeing for their lives. That is simply a lie. And because these countries are not only allowing these caravans to operate, but in some cases assisting them, we have to hold them accountable. I mean, look, we've got a great historic relationship with Mexico, but they're not acting like a very good neighbor right now. And unfortunately, we need to have, I think, look, there's carrots and sticks in every international relationship. Right now is time for a lot more stick than carrot when it comes to Mexico.
Interesting story out in Washington Examiner about technology, right? Because it's not just about border barriers, as we've said over and over and over again, but that's all the Democrats want to talk about. U.S. government adopting a DNA testing system that would allow border officials to assess within 2 hours whether immigrants claiming to be in the same family are in fact telling the truth, because, of course, we've incentivized coyotes to put children with adults as a way to get into the country with the catch and release policies that we've pursued, particularly as it pertains to families. The FBI approved the use last June of an automated system developed with the military that can be operated by a non-scientist to process cheek swabs and other DNA. In October, it was used on human remains found after wildfires swept through Northern California. It's now under consideration by DHS and ICE for use in identifying people trying to come to this country and whether they are the family members, whether they are part of the same family as they're claiming to be. 2 hours. It'll be interesting to see the rationale that Democrats come up with to oppose that.
Right. No, and listen, I think that would be a useful tool, but I guess I would also say, Dan, even that is not enough. Here's the point. Our asylum laws.
It's one thing.
And our asylum laws, out of the best of intentions, by the way, right, because we are a generous country and we want to help people who are legitimately fleeing persecution. And what that means is that they are in danger from their government because of their race, ethnicity, gender, political belief. That's asylum. That's what the law is for. If you read it, it's very clear. That is not what's going on with these Central American migrants. These countries are poor places, and they're dangerous places, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, but they are not places of persecution. That's simply not the reality on the ground there. That's why 90% of these people who apply for asylum, we know historically, are not eligible for asylum. So I would argue that our asylum laws are being, on a vast scale, completely manipulated and abused and gamed.
Well, so that prompts this question, particularly what we know with what AMLO is doing. Even he's saying one thing publicly, he's doing something else very different privately. So is what Tucker Carlson said on his show in a conversation with Secretary of Migration for the state of Guanajuato, Mexico, he said, look, based on what Mexico is doing, they are a hostile nation that is seeking to undermine U.S. sovereignty. Is that a fair characterization of Mexico?
I wouldn't go as far as to call them hostile. I think Tucker I think that's a stretch to call them hostile. But I will say this again, as I said earlier, they're certainly not acting neighborly. They're not acting like a good friend and ally in this case, and they need to be held to account for that. But longer term, we need to change our asylum laws. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Again, we did this out of the best of intentions, but our generosity is being massively abused. Now, that's not going to happen quickly, though. I wrote an article on Real Clear Politics about this. I think the immediate situation is so dire that I think the president needs to issue a second emergency order. We have to stop accepting asylum applications at our southern border temporarily. We have to cease this practice because it is not working. These are not asylum seekers. They live in bad neighborhoods. And listen, I'm not trying to diminish that reality, but you know what? A lot of Americans live in bad neighborhoods.
Yep.
We don't then say anyone in the world who lives in a tough neighborhood, who has crime in their neighborhood, or who lives in a poor place is automatically allowed to come to the United States based on our asylum statutes. That is not what asylum is about, and it makes no practical sense for the United States. I would also add, by the way, my own father fled corruption and violence in Latin America. A lot of U.S. Hispanics are in that category. They themselves or their forefathers fled Latin America because of the problems of Latin America. What we cannot do is bring the problems of Latin America on a wholesale level to the United States. Those people that come here legally, they don't come to the U.S. so that we can then create, a replica of Latin America in the United States. What we have going on right now with the lawlessness at our southern border, unfortunately, there's a danger of that. There's a danger. If we just say anyone can come in, claim asylum, they're then shipped to the interior of the country on U.S. taxpayer money, given cash benefits, and just expected on their own volition to show up for hearings, that's a ludicrous proposition. It could permanently change the economy, the culture, the security of the United States, and it's not fair to anyone. It's particularly not fair to legal immigrants, by the way, who did it the right way.
He is Steve Cortes, CNN political commentator. And Steve, I understand too, you're working on the slogan for Trump's reelection. He's in the spitballing stage right now, talking about CAG, Keep America Great. I don't think that's good enough. So please continue to work with his comms team to come up with a proper acronym for the reelect.
Will do. Get back to you on it.
All right, Steve Cortes, thanks for joining us.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on